What if you wake up in the middle of the night to a faint vibration under your feet? Barely noticeable, easy to dismiss as creaky plumbing or a truck passing far away. But hours later, the ground splits open and lava erupts into the sky, just blocks from your home. What happens next is something no one has ever tried before at this scale. No, this is not a doomsday movie. That is what happened on January 23, 1973, on the small Icelandic island of Heimaey. A quiet fishing town with just over 5,000 residents suddenly found itself face to face with a volcanic eruption. And rather than flee in panic and abandon everything, the people there decided to fight back with seawater. Most people would run. These folks stayed and tried something no one had ever attempted on this scale. The result was not just survival. It changed how we think about fighting nature itself. If you have ever wondered what a community can pull off with zero time and everything on the line, you will want to see how this ends. If you are the kind of person who is excited by forgotten stories like this, keep watching. Discover what happened on this island, because what they did next turned a disaster into a breakthrough the world never saw coming. It is a real event that has become one of the most remarkable examples of community response to a natural disaster. The way Heimaey responded has been studied for decades. People still talk about it not just because of the outcome, but because of the approach. It was hands-on, experimental, and driven by the idea that doing something, even something risky, was better than giving up. There was no checklist. No one had a playbook for what to do when lava is about to swallow your only harbor. The decisions were fast and often improvised, but they came from a place of deep understanding of the island, of the sea, and each other. That familiarity mattered. It meant that even in the middle of panic, there was a baseline of trust. Neighbors did not need convincing, they just showed up and got to work. But what do you do when the lava keeps coming and you are running out of time? It was not perfect. Mistakes were made. The equipment broke. Some of the early efforts looked laughable in hindsight, but no one was aiming for perfection. They were aiming for the possible. That mindset, trying, failing, adjusting, and trying again, is what made the response different from most other disaster stories. It was messy, but it worked. Not because they had all the answers, but because they refused to wait for someone else to show up with them. Heimaey is a 5-square-mile island just off Iceland's southern coast. Life there was predictable and deeply tied to the sea. The town thrived on fishing, with boats constantly coming and going from a naturally sheltered harbor. Before 1973, the island's volcano, Eldfell, had been quiet for thousands of years. So long, in fact, that most residents did not really think of it as a threat. There were no monitoring systems in place, no emergency protocols for eruption. No one expected trouble. On the night of the eruption, a few small earthquakes were recorded. Nothing too unusual for a region sitting on the boundary of the Eurasian and North American tectonic plates. But at 1:55 a.m., the ground split open without warning. A fissure nearly a mile long tore across the landscape, glowing red and spewing lava and ash. The eruption began terrifyingly close to the town, not some distant mountaintop, right near homes, schools, and the harbor. Lava fountains reached up to 500 feet in the air, lighting up the dark sky. It looked catastrophic. Yet amid the chaos, something went right. Nearly every fishing boat had been forced to return to port earlier that day due to bad weather. And then something strange happened with the boats. That coincidence turned out to be life-saving. Within hours, authorities and volunteers managed to evacuate nearly the entire population by sea. No one knew how much time they had, but there was no hesitation. People got moving. They left behind homes, businesses, pets, everything because the priority was staying alive. But getting people off the island was just the start. As the lava crept toward the harbor, a new threat emerged, one that could wipe the town out permanently. Over the next several days, lava crept closer to the eastern edge of town. By May, parts of Heimaey were buried under 30 to 70 feet of solidified lava. Fires broke out. Roofs collapsed under the weight of ash. Over 300 buildings were lost, and the local power station was knocked offline. One fish processing plant was completely destroyed, and others were severely damaged. The real threat, though, was the harbor. It was the lifeline of the town. Lava was advancing directly toward its mouth. If the harbor became blocked, The entire fishing-based economy would vanish. Rebuilding would be meaningless without it. That is when an idea surfaced. Strange, risky, and totally unproven. What if they could cool the lava down with seawater? It had never been tried at this scale, but they figured it was worth a shot. Seawater was one thing they had in abundance. What happened next sounds insane until you see the results. They started with fire hoses, literally treating the lava like a burning building. Unsurprisingly, it did not do much, but it did offer a glimmer of hope. That effort soon grew. Larger pumps were brought in. Pipes were stretched over the still hot lava fields, with bulldozers dragging them into place. Crews operated in brutal conditions. Steam clouds erupted in every direction. The ground beneath their machines sometimes glowed from heat. And while some pipes melted instantly, one surprising material held up and changed everything. Plastic? Surprisingly, plastic pipes worked better than metal ones. When filled with water, they resisted melting, even when laid directly over active lava. They even brought in a ship, the Sandy, to spray lava from the sea. At peak, the operation dumped more than 100 gallons of seawater per second onto the advancing flow. The work was exhausting and dangerous. Pumps failed constantly. Crews had to make non-stop repairs. Many wore makeshift gear, goggles, gloves, and whatever protection they could scrounge up. Visibility was often terrible. The heat was relentless, but they did not stop. Over 5 months, the operation poured nearly 2 billion gallons of seawater onto the lava. The constant cooling began to harden the flow and slow its advance. Eventually, the lava stopped short of the harbor. The town's economic heart was saved. But it did not just stop the disaster, it gave the town something they never expected. The cooled lava helpfully reshaped the island. The new lava field formed a protective wall that made the harbor more resistant to future storms. What had started as destruction ended in a kind of reinforcement. Even the lava's heat was not wasted. By 1974, residents were already tapping residual volcanic warmth for hot water and electricity. The ash that once buried the airstrip was used to lengthen its runway. Homes were rebuilt using landfill created from the eruption. The people of Heimaey did not just return, they adapted. They used the very material that threatened them to build something new. Could this happen again? That question still comes up among scientists and emergency planners. By the end of 1975, about 85% of the original population was back. The fishing industry recovered. The island became not just a story of survival, but a symbol of resourcefulness. National Geographic ran a feature. European outlets picked it up. Scientists visited to study the cooling techniques. What Heimaey had done became a case study in disaster management. The total cost was about $1.4 million. A lot for the 1970s, but far less than what would have been lost had they done nothing. No army of experts, no futuristic tech. Just locals, firefighters, and volunteers willing to try something that had not been done before. And it worked. This story is about action, not miracles. Grit, improvisation. The kind of problem-solving that happens when people decide not to give up, even when the odds seem ridiculous. But there is another layer to it too. What happened on Heimaey showed how fast communities can move when they are not waiting for permission. There were no lengthy debates, no endless meetings. Just people who knew what was at stake and were willing to take a risk. The long-term effects were more than just economic. Psychologically, it gave people a sense of control after nature had torn through their lives. Instead of being helpless, they became part of the solution. That matters, especially in disasters where the usual story is one of loss and powerlessness. Years later, the eruption is still talked about in emergency response circles. Techniques developed during the Heimaey operation influenced future efforts to control lava in Hawaii and elsewhere. What is left today is more than a rebuilt town. The lava field is still there. So are the new homes, the extended runway, and the reshaped harbor. But it is also a place layered with memory. The story is worth remembering because not every fight is winnable. But sometimes when people care enough to try, they pull off something that lasts longer than the fire they were trying to stop. So the next time it feels like the odds are impossible, remember Heimaey.